So, Scoop, thank you so much for joining. Like I said, it's a pleasure to have you on. First thing I want to say is congrats on the 9-year anniversary of your Scoop B radio show.
Thank you.
Yeah, looking back on the entire project, how happy are you with it? And what would you say are some of the highlights from the show in these 9 years?
So Scoopy Radio actually started while I was working at CBS back in 2015, 2016. And what happened was my business partner and I wanted to tell the story of how I started in the industry. And I actually started in 97, which was the Last Dance era Bulls. So I was around, the Michaels, the Scotties, the Dennis Rodmans, and Luke Longley, and all those guys. And so I had old tapes in a Timberland box with interviews with Dikembe Mutombo, Scott Burrell, B.J. Armstrong, Jason Williams. This is Jason Williams that played for the Nets. And a bunch of other people. And we digitized those tapes. They were just hard copy tapes. If you know my story, I started at 12 with the Nets hosting a kids radio show. And we digitized those tapes and put it on a site called Podomatic, and the response was insane. So we decided to take Scoopy Radio and put it on a server and do it through podcasts, our own situation, and brand it and do what he needed to do. And we ended up doing newer interviews. So like the first interview that we did that wasn't archived, wasn't a time capsule as we called it, was an interview with Tim Thomas, where he talked about a story about he and Kenyon Martin years ago. And that's kind of started the trajectory of Scoopy Radio. And from there, we've had anybody from tennis star Pete Sampras on to the voice of Siri to DJ Khaled to Kobe Bryant, Hall of Famer Isiah Thomas, Shaquille O'Neal, Charles Barkley, Kenny the Jet Smith. Kenny Smith told a story on Scoopy Radio. I basically asked him, had Michael Jordan not retired and played baseball, would the Rockets still have won those 2 NBA championships? And he said we would have beat them, no question. And that interview went viral. That was like the first big moment. Tim Thomas was a pivotal moment because that was the start. But Kenny Smith's interview, it went to a different stratosphere. They talked about it on ESPN with Rachel Nichols, Byron Scott. At the time, I believe Robert Ory was on there. Like, this was a conversation that spanned about 3 days. Scottie Pippen weighed in on the matter as well. And we just really started to move with Scoopy Radio. And, years later, we're still dropping interviews, whether that's Ice Cube, whether that is, a bunch of different people. There's been too many to name, and I'm grateful.
Awesome. And you said you started working in the industry in 97. So obviously, the NBA media has changed dramatically over the years. How challenging was it for you to adjust to everything that was going on and keep up with everything?
So for me, I graduated grad school in 2011. I was working in NBA media for 2 years, from 97 to 99. So I was around the first NBA lockout and worked that lockout short season. And then after that ended, they canceled my show. The Nets were rebranding at the time. And so when I started with the Nets, that was 97. John Calipari was the head coach of the team and was the vice president of basketball operations. Keith Van Horn was their first pick in the draft. And so Sam Cassell was there, and Jason Williams, Kendall Gill. And so what happened was, after my 2 years with the Nets, I was thankful because I was able to go back to being a regular kid. I went to high school. I started in 7th grade. I ended at the end of my 8th grade year, and I went to high school, went to college, went to grad school, and still had relationships with people in basketball and media. So I still was coming back to games and would interview players and really practice my craft. And I think that's so important. One of my favorite books is a book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and it talks about—
I read it. Yeah.
Up to 10,000 hours.
10,000 hours. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So for me, I feel like in high school and college, I definitely got that 10,000 plus hours, whether that was writing for the school newspaper, having my own column, going to college, and even in high school, being the public address announcer and DJ for basketball games. And just developing relationships with athletes. And I think that is something that I developed during my time in high school, college, undergrad, and grad school. And then after that, it was time to get back to work. I lived in my grandmother's basement for about 5 years and was freelancing at a bunch of different publications. One time I was freelancing at about 10 to 12 different publications at one time. And it was really just being in the space, reintroducing myself to the space. But I'll also add that while I was in grad school, I actually had an internship that had nothing to do with sports. And it was something that I enjoyed quite a bit. I interned at NBC News, and I worked there at a time where Brian Williams was taking over for NBC Nightly News. Tom Brokaw was on his way out, and I would share the elevator sometimes with Tom Brokaw and have conversations about media and just the future. I would see Brian Williams every now and then. And I also got really cool with Lester Holt, who was behind. He did the weekends on an NBC Nightly News, and that experience there, it really allowed me to network with a lot of my peers who were also interns and who would be colleagues in the future. And I learned just how much you never know who the person on your left or your right is going to be. But it was pretty cool. So I went from interning to finishing grad school to freelancing at about 10 to 12 different publications. And then, getting in the right situation, I went from the Source magazine to CBS and had a podcast that did very well. I had my own show on the network. I was writing and I had interviews. I would kind of go back to my phone book and just book interviews with people, and they would talk about different topics that were interesting to people. So there were interviews that I did that got picked up by TMZ, Complex, Bleacher Report. And this was kind of before the digital wave was standard. This was like 2015, 2016. And my team and I kind of saw where things were going, and we stayed with it.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned building those relationships, earning, players' trust, front office people trust, stuff like that. What do you think? I mean, today everyone pretty much has a platform. I mean, it's much easier to be a public NBA speaker, let's say, than it was, I think, when you probably started. So that being said, what do you think about where the industry is today? Because there's been a lot of criticism about how certain players are covered, how certain players or team are not covered enough. What do you think about the whole industry today?
I mean, everybody has an intent, an agenda, or focus. And I think there's room for everybody, but I think there are so many voices. You have to, I think on the NBA side, there's a level of vetting. I think on the media side, there are a lot of people who are journalists that might be fans and a lot of fans that might be journalists. And those are two different things. But I also think that now you're seeing a lot of players who have seen the media craze and they want in on it too. And so I think many news organizations are looking at players as voices because their connectivity to the locker room. And I think for someone like myself, who has been in the game for such a long time and has my own story, you have to be able to mix and mingle and also get the work done in a way that is both player friendly and media friendly. And it's a balance. You have to really you have to really, I think a lot of it is your motive and also your love. If you're in it to just be famous or to be seen, maybe this isn't the right profession for you. If you're in it because you actually love the game of basketball, then this is the lane for you. And it's not just basketball, it's media in general. There's a lot of hard work. If I can compare it, it's not exactly the same, but I grew up in a church and I went to a Christian college, and I know I have a lot of friends who are pastors and who are in the ministry. And if you just want to get up on Sunday and preach, then that's not the lane for you, because you still got to visit people in the hospital. You got to bury people. You might have to speak in court on somebody's behalf. You're up praying at night. There's so much that goes into it comparatively in media. Like there's nights where days I haven't slept in 2 days because I'm tracking down a story and putting stuff together. It's so much more than just the glitz and glamour of social media and television.
Yeah. Yeah, that's some of the challenges that we're facing, especially being based in Europe. The time difference, so a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of effort, but I think that's the only way to do it, honestly. So yeah. Scoop, you mentioned the new media movement, so the player-driven media, let's say. Do you think that they were able to accomplish what they were set to accomplish when it all started? I guess kind of like the antidote to the mainstream stuff that we're seeing, the mainstream talk and narrative stuff like that.
Well, I think new media, there's many layers to it. It's literally an onion. So I'll take it from a couple of different angles. One, I feel like pre-COVID, like 2019 to 2020, you kind of saw the certain folks who were going to make that transition. So
Mhm.
you look at the Draymond Greens, the Kendrick Perkins, the Matt Barnes, the Steven Jacksons. I'll even add my dude Ryan Hollins as well as Brendan Haywood into the pot. Those guys were, freshly retired and still very connected to the league as recently retired players. And I think in the case of Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson, they kind of had a head start in comparison to Draymond and Kendrick Perkins and Brendan Haywood, because they were doing television on ESPN and TNT before that was just like the standard in some ways. And this is coming off the heels of Charles Barkley being freshly retired and then going. And so now you're seeing another wave now where you have Marcus Morris on television, who I think the world of, and I like he's fresh out of water, so he's making references like YNs and things like that. So when I look at pre-COVID and I look at the guys who were in, it took another step when the world shut down because of a global pandemic. And I think more people were on their phones, more people were on Twitter, more people were on Instagram, TikTok, and it was like this boom, this meteoric boom. So I feel like a lot of former players really honed in on their voices. Again, I feel like Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson had a head start because even though they left network television, they still had a contract with Showtime, and Showtime benefited them because they could totally be themselves. And so they ended up taking that and then moving it independent, and their independent was still mainstream because they played, so they had a voice.
Yeah.
I think that what happened was once we came out of lockdown during the height of the pandemic, the Warriors went to the finals in 22 and played the Celtics. And then Draymond Green would start talking about the new media. And it was right on target because it went from that to him doing a series of different shows to being a contributor to TNT. And, the comparisons to Charles Barkley began. I'll tell you a funny story. I won't name the person, but someone told me they were on a plane with Draymond. And no, it was the other way around. They were on a plane with Charles Barkley. And that person was friends with Draymond as well. And before they took off, they said, "I'm gonna call somebody." Charles said, "Who?" They said to me, "Your replacement." Who? It's Draymond Green. He said, "Yeah, right." He said, "Hold on." So they FaceTime Draymond. Charles takes the phone and goes, "What the hell do you want? What the hell do you want?" And it was just a funny exchange because I've always seen those guys as wordy and you love and hate them at the same time, but they bring a lot of good points home and they bring attention wherever they go. So I just think that you saw that shift, that constant cosmic shift, and then you saw guys like Brendan Haywood continuing his good work at NBA TV. You see my boy Ryan Hollins over doing color commentating for the Houston Rockets as well. So it's been this cosmic shift, and now you're seeing the next generation within the current generation making those moves.
Yeah, YouTube channels and stuff like that. I mean, that's always an interesting content to watch, I guess. So I think that's overall it's been very beneficial for the entire thing. Scoop, one of the reasons I wanted to chat with you today is the Freezeout episode. So Scoop did like a mini documentary on the Freezeout on the 1985 All-Star Game and the entire conspiracy behind Michael Jordan. So why did you decide to kind of tackle that specific story from Jordan's career?
So I'll take it back a little further. I told you I was at CBS, and I began to just get retired players coming on to tell stories. And Michael Jordan's stories are very fascinating to people because Michael was so highly regarded, heavily protected, and he's this American treasure that a lot of people don't know tons about other than what's put out there, which is great. You want your brand to be protected. I want to put that out there. My intent is never to besmirch, to tarnish a legacy. It's always to just humanize and tell stories. And so over time, people have told me Michael Jordan stories. There was a buddy of mine who played in the NBA named Rashawn McLeod, who told a story years ago about how Michael Jordan was playing against Jerry Stackhouse in a game, and while he was playing against Jerry Stackhouse, was singing Anita Baker's "Giving You the Best That I Got." And I'm told that game he scored 48 on Jerry Stackhouse, and Jerry Stackhouse was mad. Jerry Stackhouse called Rashawn McLeod and cursed him out. I said that didn't happen, and I ended up getting Jerry's number. Jerry and I are cool now, very cool. But Jerry said that didn't happen, and he came on my show and told his side of the story. So that's where it lays. Then there's stories of Horace Grant sharing with me on Scoopy Radio what Michael Jordan was like in practice, and he said he was the devil in practice. And so over time, you're just hearing all these different stories about Michael. And so fast forward to last year, I spent some time with Dominique Wilkins and in LA. And Dominique, I asked Dominique about the Freezeout game. And of course, at the time, Dominique was not, this was 1985. Dominique participated in the slam dunk contest, but Dominique was not in the All-Star game. And I asked him about the Freezeout, and he kind of was hesitant and answered the question, almost walked away. And then I said, well, if I can, would you like to see Isiah and Michael bury the hatchet, whatever that is? And he goes, you would like to see that. And so when I put out the interview, I just was that video, I think, has almost 10,000 views on my YouTube channel now. But the phrase Freezeout, there's not a lot of data out there to suggest it. And the data that's out there about the Freezeout is simply, it's more along the lines of that it happened. It was like a definite. It was in the history books. And I wanted to learn more about it. And what I find that in the 90s specifically, in the 80s and the 90s, both, a lot of things are documented, but this was pre-internet. And there's not a lot of stuff out there to kind of question, challenge it, or discuss it. It's just written as it's definite that it happened that way. And so I wanted to dig deep more into that. And so the combination of, talking to Dominique and, my library with Scoopy Radio was full of just interviews of just different things that people have talked about. And so I had conversations with over the last 5 years with people discussing the Freezeout. And so John Sally and I have had a conversation in LA about that a couple of years ago. Isiah Thomas and I have spoken about Michael and just their issues. And then, there were other people in the documentary as well, Sidney Moncrief, well as Michael Ray Richardson, who were both on the Eastern Conference All-Stars. And then talked to former Net Jason Williams, who, full circle moment, goes back to my childhood with the Nets. He talked about kind of how Michael was revved up to play against Kobe in the 98 All-Star game at Madison Square Garden. And, that seemed like a full circle moment. We talked to Shaq about it. So there's a myriad of different people in a 22-minute mini documentary that's out. And I'm glad to share that with the world.
Yeah, we're gonna put the link down in the description so everyone can go and watch it. I think it's an interesting, very interesting piece. You kind of, it's a good deep dive into, like you mentioned, you basically gave the other side of the story, which I think is important. And I also feel that sometimes, there isn't really, you can't really hear the other part of Michael Jordan's story in the NBA. For example, when the GOAT debate comes up and people actually dissect his career, and then you see stuff mentioned that if you didn't do your diligence, if you didn't deep dive, you didn't really hear about it. Like you said, his brand is very protected and for a good reason. Sure. But do you think that his career is kind of over glorified in a way?
Michael Jordan entered the league at a point that was perfect. If you looked at 1979, Magic Johnson and as well as Larry Bird saved the league from going bankrupt and almost crashing. And then David Stern came in and did his numbers. And so I feel like, in answer to your question, I think Michael carried the torch from where it was to where it's going and where it still is. So was it overglorified? I think you've never seen anything quite like it. You've seen glimpses of it for sure. In my estimation, if Kobe Bryant watched Michael and carried the torch from, because I think Kobe is the closest thing to Michael we've seen. I think, in my opinion, that Michael Jordan carried the torch from Dr. J, and Dr. J had the benefit, and sometimes I think the disadvantage of not having full years. Like, he was an ABA and an NBA legend, but at the same time, I wonder what life would be like if he spent his whole career in the NBA and how he'd be viewed. I also think that when you look at someone like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he's won on every level, but I think centers don't get the same love that guards do. Yeah. The only two centers that move like short, skinny guards is Shaq and Dwight Howard. And Shaq sold shoes in a way Dwight Howard did not. And that's no disrespect to him. Shaq was just different and was a marketing and brand genius. So guards just get those looks like in football, where quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers get the love in ways linemen don't. So I think that for Michael Jordan, was he overglorified? I wouldn't disrespect that man like that, because I also feel like when you watch The Last Dance, you kind of learned how his whole marketing strategy and branding went into place. Mm-hmm. The part in Last Dance where they talked about how they studied tennis players and how they modeled his aura and his persona after more tennis players than just a basketball player. That was never seen before. And I've often compared that to politics. When you look at Barack Obama, yeah, you saw JFK, and JFK to me is comparable in this instance, in this specific instance, to Dr. J. And if Obama took a page out of JFK's book, Obama was more like Michael Jordan, right? Because you had never seen the social media impact. You had never seen all the young people going out to vote. JFK had the look. He had the young people. I remember in history class, they were talking about the difference between his debate on television versus how people heard it on the radio. And the older people heard his opponent and thought he won. But when they saw JFK on TV, they thought he won. And I compare that to Obama and JFK because I feel like Obama took a page out of JFK's book, but I think he also had young people, white people, black people, aliens, everybody going out to vote. And I think that there is a comparison there. To keep it strictly back to basketball, I think that Steph Curry and LeBron have watched Michael, and they have definitely created their own style and their own impact. But I also think that had it not been Michael, some of these sneaker contracts that guys have gotten would not have existed. And some of the airtime, like social media, that comes with it now. But there's a lot of guys that owe a lot of credit to Michael because the money was not the money that it was prior to Michael, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. What do you think about the comparisons, I guess, dominating the NBA sphere and the NBA media, especially those cross-era comparisons, GOAT debate, stuff like that?
It's a fan and a media debate, but I never bought into it because Michael and LeBron are not the same player. The closest thing to Michael is Kobe. Kobe's not here to defend himself. God rest his soul. Kobe was very instrumental in my career, both he and his family. And I actually went to college down the street from Lower Merion High School. And just hearing stories about Kobe and his work ethic, even at 17, 18 years old, was insane to me. Kobe knew he was going to be special. Kobe knew that he was going to be one of those ones, and he walked in it. And I think for LeBron is a throwback to so many different people. I mean, like, to me, he's can play at his size. There are comparisons to Charles Barkley. There's comparisons to Penny Hardaway. There's comparisons to Scottie Pippen. There's comparisons to Tim Duncan. I think he is the epitome of turning on classic sports and watching all the 70s, 80s, and 90s games out there and putting them into one My Player on NBA 2K. But this whole comparison thing is really not new. I remember having a conversation with Dr. J on Scoopy Radio about the comparisons of different people. And, he shared with me that when he was playing, there was the Connie Hawkins and Connie Hawkins. Like, there was this constant comparison. Just like I think when people talk about all-star games and high scores, the 1985 all-star game, I think the high score was 146 points. That's on par because now people shoot more threes. The NBA has always leveled up and gotten more star player. The only difference, I think, between 85 and now 40 years is the acceptance of taking more threes and other ill-advised shots and less defense being played in the All-Star game. And if you look at the 85 All-Star game, there's more defense being played. Then, to go back to your question specifically about the GOAT conversation, I think sometimes people take it too far and they weaponize it, and it creates a conversation that's just not productive. And I also think that when you're comparing players, you have to be careful because many people, you have to meet people where they are. There are certain conversations that I can't have with people about the 60s and the 70s because I don't know it. I watch video, I had conversations with older people. I'll even talk about the 85 All-Star game. The All-Star game in 1985, which I did a documentary on, was in February of 1985. I was born in May of 1985. Mm-hmm. I actually was not here, but I went and watched the game, and some of those players on that team, I can pick up a phone and call for context. But if I'm arguing with someone about it in the 90s, or somebody who was born in the 90s or the early 2000s, we'll just have a different point of view, and that's okay. But I think sometimes when you're on social media and when you're on consistent argumentative TV networks where that's their job to debate, it just creates narratives that are counterproductive, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the things that you've included in the Freezeout episode is the Isiah Thomas interview, and he basically mentioned that he didn't know that there was beef with MJ until he saw the Last Dance documentary. Mm-hmm. You also mentioned, Dominique Wilkins, you addressed that during your interview. So based on what you've heard from those NBA legends and from those people close to them, do you think the two will ever kind of reconcile?
The way I've heard it from different people is Michael is not going to give Isiah the attention because that would platform Isiah. But I've also think that Isiah and Magic Johnson reconciling is different than Magic and Isiah reconciling. I think that in my findings and talking to different people, one of the things that I learned that I found interesting was that prior to that Bulls team, meaning any iteration of 91 to 98, you never heard champions outing other champions. So like publicly, you never heard Magic out Isiah. You never heard Isiah out Bird. You just never heard those type of things. And to me, the Bulls kind of broke that mold. I've been at panels before where, Scottie Pippen and Charles Oakley have maybe not said kind things about Isiah. Mm-hmm. And that was different and it was a public forum. Those were more inclusive conversations that were being had. I know that on Isiah's side, he felt a way that, a taping crew came at NBA TV to interview him for that. And then the whole Michael thing came up, and then that video, and, he felt blindsided by that. And I also think that what's interesting about Isiah and Michael's beef or created beef or whatever, however you want to slice or dice it, is that Isiah's from Chicago. Michael played for his hometown team. And then this whole Freezeout narrative was written about, created, however you want to slice the pie. I think sometimes in life, when enough stuff is put out there, let's say hypothetically the Freezeout didn't happen. You put it out enough, you begin to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it was made up in the minds of the people, in the minds of maybe MJ, it happened. But I also do think that even if the Freezeout didn't happen, something happened. I've heard people talk about something with an elevator where there was a conversation with guys, and there was some type of argument. And I've asked around about it, and the thing that I come back with is that I know that narratives are created. If you look at the documentary, I used an example of Shaq creating
David Robinson.
Yeah, and Shaq's from New Jersey but moved to San Antonio, and he talked about how years ago David Robinson, I guess, snubbed him and didn't sign something, and that never happened, but he used that as motivation. And so when I look at Michael Jordan's 49 points after the All-Star game, you wonder, was that motivation, or was that just Michael kicking ass? But Isaiah's Pistons were kicking their ass for years, and I do think that the handshake part is a big caveat to it, not shaking the Bulls' hands after. Isiah has refuted that on Mark Jackson's podcast, saying that this was never a conversation that was discussed prior to 91 when the Pistons lost in the conference finals. And I just think that there are a lot of people who don't like Isiah for a myriad of reasons. And I also think that for Michael, when he came into the league in 91, or excuse me, in 84, but then in 91 where he took over, I think that both he and many people were in lockstep in making him the face, and they were successful in it. And that carried over into business, that carried over into branding. He just entered at a right time that really made he and his brand shine. And I'm not sure at this point if that conversation between the two of them would be fruitful.
What do you think? How are people going to look at MJ's career like 20, 30 years from now? Because from how I see it, I mean, the player's legacy is great only if it kind of stands the test of time, if you know what I mean. And do you think that he'll still be, especially, when players 20, 30 years from now, they didn't have the chance to watch him. So, there's only so much they can learn about him, I guess, having not lived that experience of watching MJ. So do you think that it's going to be looked at differently?
I think one thing that helps Michael is his shoes.
The brand.
The brand in and of itself. Like, when I look at Jordan 1 shoes, they're not the most comfortable shoes to me. I have a few pair, but I look at them like Chuck Taylor sneakers.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck stood the test of time, but Chuck more for his sneaker than you know who Chuck is. And I look at Michael, he has the sneakers, he has the tape and more. But what I find in talking to younger NBA players, and they know my story about starting young, sometimes I'll sit in the locker room and they'll ask me, Scoop, what was it like watching Michael? I don't even know Michael from the Wizards. Some guys don't. They'll know what their brothers tell them. And the benefit of YouTube works. Zach LaVine of the Sacramento Kings, I spent significant time around him when I had a partnership with the Chicago Bulls some years ago. And him playing for the Bulls, you naturally want to talk to him about Michael. He's broken some of Michael's records or been in a conversation with Michael. And he didn't watch Michael play, but his dad really enveloped him in knowing his history. And he's very well aware of that because of YouTube. And so I think YouTube is another vehicle that makes it work. But I also feel like today's young guy, Kyrie Irving's age and a little younger, they look at Kobe as their Michael.
Yep.
And I think it dawned on me a few years ago of that, because I've been around Kobe, I've been around Michael, I've watched them both play. I'm blessed. But is different. I think as time goes on, I think if Kobe is looked at as Michael's going to be looked at like Magic or Kareem. There's still a respect, but I still have a hard time totally looking at it that way because we know Magic as great as Magic was on the court, and I never slight him. A lot of people respect Magic's business acumen at this point more than they do Magic on the court, even though Magic was your parents and my parents, their guy, as well as Dr. J. And I think Kareem, again, is a center. I think people look at Kareem as legendary, but I think people pay more attention to guards. I can't take anything away from Kareem. I just think over time. And I think what's going to happen with LeBron is I think LeBron is a tweener between Magic and Michael, both on the business side and the play on the court. And as time goes on, our kids are going to look at LeBron in some aspect like Michael. I don't think it's a clear-cut comparison. And I'm not talking on the court. I'm talking more about just his presence.
Yeah, I think the challenging part about talking about Michael like 20, 30 years from now, you haven't lived it. So it's because MJ to me is much more than just like a non-court persona. He's like a cultural phenomenon, and that's going to live through his shoes. I agree with that. But I just feel like that debate is just going to come down to the numbers and the accolades, if you know what I mean, when it's the person who hasn't been there when he was at his peak.
I agree, and I also think that as time goes on, that GOAT debate is going to be more along the lines of LeBron and who.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wonder if I used to wonder. I won't even say now. I used to wonder when LeBron retires, is it going to be a Luka LeBron debate? Is it going to be KD and LeBron? Like, I think the difference between KD and Michael is just the shoes and the way they play is a bit different. But I also feel like KD is in an era where he gets logjam between Steph Curry and LeBron.
Yep.
And you don't appreciate his greatness the same way. Like when I look at KD to me is a living legend. And I feel like people are going to look at him and start doing the comparison thing with bouncing around teams, but so did LeBron.
Strictly talking basketball, I think he's the epitome of basketball in terms of like the on-court skill. He's going to be the one that I'm going to miss watching the most when he retires. So yeah. Scoop, we talked about the feuds and the beefs and stuff like that. I actually watched a video of Dwayne Wade. He talked about how during the NBA top 75 ceremony, he was actually sitting like between Michael and Isiah, something like that. And that's like the first time he felt like the hatred between the two. And then he talked about how the lack of that in today's era makes today's era look soft, something like that. Do you think that today's NBA lacks those types of, there's been a lot of talk about the missing rivalry, stuff like that. Do you think that the NBA would benefit from those dynamics being back again in the league?
Yeah, but then when you have it, you villainize Draymond, you villainize Dylan Brooks. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
I think AAU culture has made everybody friends. AAU culture brought LeBron, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade together in Miami. And other instances of that, whether that is, Kawhi Leonard signing with the Clippers and Paul George forcing his way out of Oklahoma and becoming a Clipper, whether that is a TV appearance on ESPN with Joel Embiid and Paul George ultimately becoming a 76er. I think that you can't have it both ways. And I think that rivalries are good for sports. But I'm going to say this about Isiah, and I actually shared this with Isiah last week. I said the critique that one person shared with me that I think is so interesting is the same way that people praise Michael for being this competitive juggernaut and sometimes a jerk. They praise him for that as a 6'6" guy. For somebody under 6'6", they villainize Isiah for the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think Isaiah kind of became the how should I say, he isn't, people don't really judge him for his NBA career. He just and this is unfortunate because I think I think he's without a doubt one of the greatest point guards in NBA history. But it feels like you can't mention Isaiah without mentioning MJ, if you know what I mean. And people don't really focus on what he did on the court, especially at his size.
Isaiah was kicking ass.
Hmm.
Isaiah was a top 2 point guard in his era, and is a top point guard of all time. But I think Isaiah sometimes was too smart, and I think they mainstream wants somebody a little bit more controllable.
Interesting. Interesting. Was that because of MJ, like, or because of the him
No,
overlap with his career, or
I just think it's him.
okay?
I just think certain people are threats when you are too intelligent. I think LeBron sometimes is too intelligent, or at least people around him who guide him are too intelligent, and he's a threat. I'm very interested to see what life will look like for LeBron after he retires, because he's observed all the secrets. He's observed all the moves. You can create your own basketball league and be a threat.
Hmm. And that's potentially out there, the news about him. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. Uh, Scoop, regarding the mini documentaries, do you have another project coming up, something like the Freezeout?
Yes. I can't talk about it yet, but yes.
You can't reveal the instance in NBA history you're gonna deep dive into or whatever.
But it will be something topical. Yes. There
Okay.
is something. I don't have a date, but I do have something that I have already started brainstorming with people on, using my library of content to do it. And that's the cool thing about it, using my library, like years of just interviews, and investing time, money, resources, and good relationships. There's an ability there, and we're doing it independently, because I own that. So, the cool thing about this first project that we did with the Freezeout is people have taken notice. We've done stuff on. We've made appearances on Fox, and a myriad of other places, and people are taking notice. And so, this next project, we're hoping to continue this level of independence. And if there's someone along that wants to partner with us as well, we're willing to listen as well. So, but there is something that I have concrete, and it'll be cool for you guys to all view that as well.
Awesome, awesome. We'll be looking at it for sure.